Let's hear from Peter Marinetti.
Of course. Thank you. Of course.
My name is Michael Jordan, and I'm a hell of a basketball player. Can you hear me okay with this? This is cool? My name is Peter, recovered alcoholic. Okay. All right. Grateful to be here, and thank Jerry for that very kind introduction. I get to travel a lot, and sometimes I get on a plane, and 2 planes later, 12 hours later, I finally get to the hotel, and I get up to the podium, and they have all these introduction notes and stuff, and the chairperson goes in to share his Peter, and that's about all I get. So one time I was called Russell by Jerry. Last year he called me Russell. I think there's a little weight difference between the two of us. Glad to be here. June 23rd, 1988 was my separation from alcohol. And can you fix this for me, please?
What do you want it to do, darling?
If I can move this way. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're good.
Good work.
Okay, that's my OCD. Sorry.
How about that high? Is that good?
Thank you. Okay, that's much better. June 23rd, 1988 was my separation from alcohol. And I get to talk to you guys about that. I said many times, people ask me, how do you get to speak a lot in AA? I tell them, wreck your life, make a mess of it, and then everyone wants to hear about it. I am never considered myself a special AA guy. And if people respond favorably to what I have to say, that's great. But I take no credit for that. I'll take all the credit for the screw-ups I commit and all the things I've done in the past. But any favor, anything that I do is just favor from God. And so when I get out to do these things, whether it's a Salvation Army, a Bowery meeting where most of them are wet, or a fancy, Park Avenue meeting, I treat this as a gift from God. And so I try to do my best to suit up and show up and never get to the podium like I'm about to commit a felony soon as the meeting's over. And I go into the bunker before I get here. My bunker is my prayer room that we have at home. And I fast for 4 hours at least before I give these talks. And that's whether it's a 15-minute talk at some meeting, or it's an hour talk or a 12-week series. The routine stays the same, although the venue may change and what's expected. The topic might change. But it's a 4-hour minimum fast. And the reason why I do that is I need to be an empty vessel here. I can't have me showing up at the podium. And that's why I never eat before I give these things, because if you're like me, after I eat, I kind of want to kick back and I'm not ready to go speak. And I got outside things inside of me. And I want to be an empty vessel. And in that emptiness is where we get full. And this is exactly what the 12 steps want us to do, especially 429, is completely empty us out. Experience the death of self. And in that dying of self, what happens is the spirit. We start to experience the spirit. And everything begins to change. When our book says we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle in step 4, they're referring to the life we put down on paper. We have a shift in consciousness where we can look at it differently. Now, I can't do that if I'm not doing that kind of work. And if I'm not disciplined to the spiritual life, I have no spiritual life. And so what I've learned, if this spiritual walk, if spirituality doesn't touch every area of my life, it touches none of my life. And I may have spiritual beliefs, but it's a big difference between having spiritual beliefs and living those beliefs. And so I need to purge me. I need to be rid of me. So when I get to do these things, I'll get some prayer work with this religious practice I've always done. And I sit in meditation, and I try to get as quiet as I can. That doesn't mean I isolate from Marion, but I can feel everything kind of coming down a notch. And I never have a radio on in my car unless I'm in a mood to listen to music. But if I'm going to go do these, it's pretty much silence. I don't like talking too much. Lots of folks like to talk to me before a meeting, and I don't get real wordy. And that's not planned. That's just what happens. Because God gives me tonight, gives us another day, a task to go do. And some of us may treat the talk as, well, it's just another talk, it's no big deal. It is a huge deal. Not that I, the speaker, am a big deal, but what we're about to do is a huge deal. Because we've been selected from a lot to go carry a message. So what message am I transmitting? Because what Jerry said is so right on point that if I'm perhaps texting, there might be a sentence, a phrase, or a word that might just flip me, give me something to think about, to ponder through the night. Now, if you're around a while, you know that's happened to you. You're listening to a speaker and they have one phrase, one sentence, one word. Some of them are funny, but it sits with you, resonates with the soul, and you start to think about that. You reflect it, you ponder, you take it into meditation, and you're never the same anymore. And how sad it is that we might just miss that, especially if we're struggling. And so I treat this task as a God-given invitation. My life is one of invitation. And I have no clue what I'm about to do when I do these things. I know I'm supposed to speak on step 4, but I didn't cram like an hour ago to come back and drop some wonderful words on you and go home and everyone thinks I'm Moses. I mean, I have no clue. There is no preparation. My preparation was yesterday. My preparation was actually early this morning. I was doing some reading. My preparation is yesterday, day before yesterday, and so on. So hopefully this talk reflects all the chopper wood and carrying water. I don't need to remember what I did because I do it. And the way you get good at writing inventory is by writing inventory. And the way you get good by hearing inventory is by hearing inventory. So I'm sober almost 29 years. I've been writing inventory almost 29 years. And I've been that's nightly inventory. I've done I don't know how many fourth steps since I've been 10 years sober. I did one up until around 10 years, and I've been doing at least 2 a year, definitely 1 a year. And the nightly reviews, if you figure writing inventory every night and sharing it once or twice a week for 29 years, I've written a lot of inventory and shared a lot of nightly reviews and done an awful lot of fourth steps. And maybe that's why I know how to hear a fourth step and I know how to write an inventory. And perhaps when we do that stuff, when we flush out, constantly prune the tree, we feel lighter and freer and more connected and not needing busy work to occupy my mind. And we truly get to experience liberation from ourselves, liberation from alcoholism, not only the booze or the other substances, but ourself, the things that accompany alcoholism. The selfish, self-centered, self-seeking person, little by slowly gets grinded into dust with the ego. And we get to live free. I will tell you that the 12 steps and God will not give me relief ever. I will not get relief from God in the 12 steps. But what I will get is complete liberation and freedom from God in the 12 steps. And one of the huge freedoms I got to experience years ago is not having to be someone else to please you. Not trying to pretend to be something else to get your approval. But being okay with me and my own skin with all the flaws and all the cracks in the armor. And that doesn't mean I just roll over and say, well, I'm flawed, I'm sick, and leave it alone and have a spirit of being apathetic, but always striving and trying to get right with God and constantly pruning the tree. But this is who I am. This microphone would have drove me nuts for an hour. That's me. I get to a podium, there's certain things I need. And that's just the way it is. There's certain things I do throughout my day that I need to do. Some people might look at me like, you're really, really sick. But that's who I am. I have fears, I have doubts, I have skepticism in my life from time to time. I get angry from time to time. But that's me. I don't try to pretend to be a spiritual guy. I don't try to pretend to be a godly guy. By my words, you see the way I walk and you make the call. Because the best sermon I can give anyone is to walk, not to talk. So I have an open life, and my life's an open book, and I invite anyone into it, and you follow me around, and you tell me if the testimony I'm about to give is true or not. At the end of the day, God will judge me for all my actions. And when that day comes, I want my name to be in His book. I don't want to say I want to do it again. June 23rd, 1988, my separation from alcohol. Guys, I had no clue about recovery. I was full of venom and hate and contempt and skepticism and doubt, and the voices in my head said, "Who are you kidding?" And I had a really powerful desire to get well again, like I did after my first treatment center and got drunk. My 6th treatment center and got drunk. My 4th treatment center got drunk. So what was different? I don't know. Other than I found myself following directions. And they were simple directions. People tell me to be at a certain place at a certain time, and I was there. That's part of living a life of rigorous honesty. I say what I do, and I do what I say. So when they would ask me to be at the meeting at 8 o'clock, I got there at 8, not 8:30. And when they told me to do certain things, I listened, even though I didn't want to. And little by slowly, I was starting to walk this walk. And when I finally landed a sponsor, and the sponsor came by me praying to God to show me a teacher, because I knew at this point, based on my own actions in the past, that I'm not going to pick the proper person to teach me. I'm going to pick a friend, a peer that I can hang out with. And I didn't need that. I needed an elder in AA, a teacher, because I had to be a student. Even now, with the amount of years I'm sober, I still so much appreciate being the student. When I call my sponsor, I'm the student. I don't push back. I don't tell him how to do it. He gives me suggestions. My job is to follow them, even though every fiber in my being says, no good. But that's what I do. And it's real easy to get information from a sponsor when they're doing their job and to push back because we're not going to like the information the sponsor gives us. But that's why I went to them in the first place. Now suddenly they give me something I don't like and I need to push back, go find a new sponsor. So I've been able to chop wood and carry water for a while now with all the mistakes I make. And my sponsors taught me, as I go through the work over and over again, exactly what step 1 looks like when I was drinking on my way in here, and what does step 1 look like currently with a few years sober, gone through the work a bunch of times. Where does step 1 meet me currently? Where does step 2 meet me? Where does step 3 meet me? And how do I do a step 4 when I've done so many fourth steps in the past? Where am I currently? And what I've learned, I always had to take a look at where am I currently in this journey. I can't rely on a spiritual awakening I had 10 or 15 years ago because yesterday's booze is not getting me drunk today. But I need to seek God today with the desperation of a drowning man. And one thing about the isms, they will little by slowly get closer and closer and closer and I can't even see them. So by writing inventory, I bring that to every identity that I'm walking with that does not come from God. And what we'll do, accumulate stuff over time. The ego will start to reemerge and reconstruct. And little by little, the ego's doing the thinking for me, which means I'm now in self-reliance and fear, and I'm looking for external conditions to make me feel okay. Self-confidence, self-assurance, I have some money, I have a relationship, I got a new car, I'm doing good. I rely upon that rather than upon the power that got me there in the first place. It's a little shift that happens. But when I'm writing inventory, regular inventory, I'm putting pen to paper at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes I've woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and something had me, and I go to my prayer room and I write inventory, I get free. And I haven't met anyone yet who's really regular with inventory, written inventory. Inventory in the head is not inventory. Because that's using the old mind to figure out problems. And the thing that brought me the illness is not where I go for the solution. But writing inventory regularly and constantly flushing out, I haven't met folks who do that, who are struggling, who are having that difficult time. And I hear that a lot, I'm struggling right now. By the way, struggle is just an illusion to the truth anyway. It's just a mask. Struggle is an illusion. My sponsor said, be at this meeting, but I want to go to that meeting to seek some vicarious pleasure. I'm struggling. I go to the gym and suddenly self-seeking takes over because she's working out over there, and suddenly I'm struggling. There's no struggle. I know what I need to do. I just don't want to. Struggle. And I start to feel some tension in me. Tension is the spirit pushing through. It's the surface of truth. I know what I need to do. I need to pray. I don't want to. I need to pray. I don't want to. And I feel this thing going on. It's all one big mask. So I begin to write inventory, and it's right after step 3. And our book talks about this. After the third step prayer, it says, next, we launched out in the course of vigorous action. And for step 3 to have some permanent and lasting effect within me, I need to write inventory. Because if I do a third step, And I say, well, I'm turning it over, I'm working at turning it over. I'm not doing anything but deluding myself into turning it over. Because I don't have, and I speak for myself, I don't have the power, nor do I have the endurance to turn it over. I just can't. I'm deluding myself into God's running my life when He really isn't. I'm just on good behavior for a while. And then we hear those very same folks say, and I take my will back all the time. The reason why we take our will back is because we never turned it over in the first place. And the proof, the evidence of turning our will and life over to care of God is by putting a pen in my hand and getting a notepad in front of me and begin to write inventory. And in that process, I will experience the transference of God to me, to the pen, to the paper, where the pen becomes the spiritual translator, literally a spiritual translator. Because if I'm thorough here with my prayer practice, I will see things popping on paper that I thought I had completely forgotten about. Things will come out of the back room that I never even knew existed. And here it is, it's being put on paper. And so how I write inventory when I'm doing a fourth step is I make prayer first. Because I don't have the ability to write a searching, fearless, and moral inventory. It's not going to happen. And how do I know that? Is because the first time I started to write inventory, I skipped over the prayer part and tried to write, and I wasn't writing, I was minimizing, justifying. And then my sponsor said, we need to pray. And I always clean up the language, but he said, we need to pray. You need to turn it over and carry out that decision with an inventory. And so I wrote a prayer across the top of the page, thank you, God, for allowing me to be searching, fearless, and moral. There is no way I can be searching, fearless, and moral because the ego is not going to permit that. I don't want to purge on paper my deepest, innermost secrets, the things I don't want to look at, the things that cause me pain. One of the reasons there's no amen at the end of the third step prayer because that body of work has just begun. So we offer this third step to God. It's just words. If we never heard the prayer before and we made a sincere, where the intent was pure, the sincere plea to God, please get me free, that's just as good. And God's going to take us by the hand and go into that back room and uncover and discover the things that are blocking me from Him. And I can only do that with God's power, complete dependence upon God. See, one of the things about going through the steps allows me to experience, not only see, but to experience, is not that I get further away from step one and powerlessness, but it drives me further into step one and my need for power. And when it comes to inventory, which is a huge piece of work, endurance is required here. I can't do that. I will justify, minimize, rationalize, get lazy, and not do it. I'll get to it when the timing's right. And the timing's never right, but a drink is always there. And so I would write this prayer across the top of the page and get quiet, pick up the pen, and then start writing. And sometimes those sessions would last a half hour, maybe an hour, sometimes 20 minutes. It's none of my business. It's my business to be prepped and position myself so God can work through me. And then God begins to reveal to us what's blocking us. On page 62, for those of you who have a big book, it says, selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows, column 1. They retaliate, column 2. Sometimes they hurt us, column 3, without provocation. But we invariably find that sometime in the past we made decisions based on self, which placed me in a position to be hurt, column 4. Our troubles are of our own making. I manufacture my own misery, even currently. No one can manufacture misery within me. I get attached to it. I get attached to something that's happening out there. Or I just start listening to the mind and I begin to manufacture my own misery. When I'm completely detached from that stuff, I become that much more effective in those situations. But when I'm not detached from it, I become ineffective. So I went back through my life, and what I did was I wrote a master list. That consisted of names. I went back through my life, mom, dad, brother, sister. This is how we do it. And listed my mom and dad, my immediate family. Then I went through schoolmates, etc., friends, and relationships. And the last 2 names I put on the list were self and God. Because I had a huge resentment towards me for what I turned into, and had huge problems with God. And I remember writing God in the first column and thinking like the world was going to open up and swallow me. How dare I be resentful of God? And my sponsor said, but it's God who's giving you this information. He knows you're angry with him. He created you. We're just going back to the manufacturer, God, so he can tweak it, so he can tune it up a little bit. And so I wrote my whole second column. I put Mom in the first column, took her off the master list, and all the reasons why I was angry with Mom. Then I went to Dad and all the reasons why I was angry with Dad. And then my brothers and so on. Then I got to self and I wrote all about me. And then I got to God. God didn't save my mom. God doesn't get involved in wars. God doesn't save children. God turned me into a drunk. And it went on and on and on and on. What a lot of us experience, the question, well, if there is a God, how come this stuff happens? That's what I was resentful with. One that I discovered not too long ago, just a few years ago, and this might resonate with a bunch of you guys. I meet a lot of AAs who I talk to them about going to their religious community, church, synagogue, wherever. Especially the Christians and the Catholics. Oh, Catholic church, I can't do it there. And they give me a whole list of reasons why they can't go. And what I tell them is what my sponsor said to me. Since when it's okay for you to hold on to a resentment? You have a resentment with your church community, don't you? Regardless of what the headlines say, regardless of what people say, you're harboring a resentment towards your religious community. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. But we justify and rationalize it away because it's some institution. Meanwhile, I have plaque on the soul wondering why I can't connect. And I tell them, I'm not telling you to go to this religious community, but you need to be rid of the resentment. And once I did that, I got involved in my religious community. And I complete my second column. And it's a lot of work. And I pray before I write, and I pray when I'm done writing, and I move over to the third column. I just want to do some mechanics for you. And the third column talks about 7 areas of self. And this is a fun one because it really gets to see where we are and how hypersensitive we are to other things, external conditions, and how attached we are to people's views of us. Rather than being satisfied with the product God put out. And the first one is pride, how I think others view me. No one should see me a certain way. No one should see me less than. No one should see me, and I would write how I would feel about that. My personal relationships, how I think this relationship should look. How these things have been hurt, interfered, or threatened. And it's really interesting. At the end of the day, it comes down to, I'm afraid of being alone. Because when I look at pride, no one should see me a certain way. If you look at me less than, what does that mean? In my mind, you don't like me. And if you don't like me, you're not going to be my friend. And if you're not my friend, you're going to leave me. You're going to abandon me. I'm going to be alone. Oh my God, I'm going to die. My personal relationships, the same thing. If I have a problem with someone in my past or someone in my present, and I don't resolve that through inventory and God and a sponsor, what goes on in me is this relationship has been hurt, interfered, or threatened, which means you don't like me. You're going to leave me. I'm going to be alone. I'm abandoned. Oh my God, I'm going to die. My self-esteem, how I see or feel about myself. If you're anything like me, I never felt good about myself. If I found the cure for cancer tonight, my mind would say, you should have done it yesterday. It's never good. I can never measure up. And I know you don't approve of me. I'm alone. Oh my God, I'm going to die. My security, my emotional security, my attachments to what you should be giving to me. What I need from you to be okay. And this is the huge piece of bondage. When step 3 says, relieve me of the bondage of self, I hear emotional security in the third column. Because what it's asking me is what I needed from people in the past so I feel okay. Just think about how selfish that is, that I'm putting demands upon everyone in this room so I can go home and feel good about myself. We go through life this way. We assign people roles. And inventory will show me over and over and over again how not only I've been assigning people roles, but I've been playing God in all of your lives. Everyone's life. Mom should have done this. Dad should have done that. My brother should have done this. And it goes on ad infinitum. If you come in contact with me, I have assigned you a role. She or he needs to say, I love you on cue. With a certain amount of enthusiasm behind it. And when they don't, I'm angry. And then I internalize that. And we get enough anger internalized, I suddenly look like someone who's suffering from clinical depression. And the only thing that's going to remedy this is a double vodka. Okay, I'm good. I'm not depressed anymore. In fact, I'm pretty good. The problem is it works. But then I need a second double vodka. And then I need some pills. And then we're gone. I take a look at my ambition, what I want out of this. What I wanted has been hurt, interfered, or threatened. My sex conduct, I need to take a look at that. My selfish and self-seeking ways in my relationships with others. And my pocketbook, no one should touch my money, ever. I can take your money, that's okay to do, but don't touch mine. And I have 7 areas of self that have been hurt, interfered, or threatened over and over and over again. Our big book says that the great reality is deep down within. God is deep down within. Not only me, but you. I do an inventory, and I have about 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 people that I'm resentful with. And my second column has about 3, 4, or 5 resentments towards that one person. I have a huge cement block between me and God. I want to experience God. Stop being in touch with other people. See, I want to part the seas without doing any work. And if I'm going to be a witness to God's love and mercy, I got to start with you. I got to walk that. But I can't because I'm blocked from you. I'm afraid of you. I'm better than you. I'm afraid of you. I'm better than you. And I have this thing that's disconnection. So I need to flush this out little by little, start to get connected to you and to you and to you. And suddenly I find myself connected to God. I've had it backwards my whole life. I've assigned God a role. The arrogance of the alcoholic. We petition God in prayer. We tell God what we need. I'm sitting in treatment for the 25th time. I got 2 days sober, and I'm telling God how He should operate. And even if we're sober 50 years, I have no business telling God to operate because I don't know that much. And that's why I don't seek information, but I seek more transformation. I don't need a new philosophy. I have a religion. I don't need a new religion. What I need is just more God, more transformation. And I have found by watching others and in my own life, until someone experiences godliness in their life through a connection with God and a communion with God, a life of interior prayer, no matter what we have on the platter, money, property, prestige, notoriety, we are always restless, irritable, and discontented and dissatisfied with the serving we've been given because there's a thing going on in here, a disconnection with God. So inventory will show me about the program within this fellowship because, quite frankly, I hate to ruffle feathers, but meetings don't fix alcoholism. Meeting makers die. Meeting makers get drunk. Some make it, usually the hard drinker. But the real alcoholic, this is one part of a 3-sided triangle. So if I only made meetings, you wouldn't have me speaking here tonight. I'd probably be in the parking lot hanging out, come back in for the Lord's Prayer and feel good. And I really feel good. I don't need all of this. But the real alcoholic, I need to do all 3. Meetings don't treat alcoholism. I need to be at meetings. I get to be at meetings. I get to be around our kind. I love going to AA. I love rubbing, elbows with all of you guys. Looking for the new guy. But there's 2 other pieces to this, and that is the big book, and this the methodology in the big book that's going to take me to God. The 12 steps manufacture spiritual transformation, like on an assembly line. If I'm balking in step 4, by the way, I don't have a step 4 problem. I don't have a 3rd step problem. I don't have a 2nd step problem. What I do have is a 1st step problem. Because I've lost the gift of desperation. And the edges are back out again. Rubber hits the road in column 4 when I take a look at my part, or I should say my behavior, where I was at fault. And the book is really clear that they acknowledge the fact that people have done bad things to us. They get that. Some of us have been victims of all sorts of abuse. People have ripped us off and done bad things to us, betrayed us. They own that. But they tell us we have to disregard the other person involved entirely, regardless of what they did, and take a look at our behavior. And they asked me 4 questions where I was selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. 4 questions. Inventory is not an autobiography. I'm not listing my assets and my liabilities. The big book doesn't care about that. They want to get down to causes and conditions. What makes me tick? my selfishness, what I'm taking, my self-seeking, what I'm thinking about taking, my need for approval, my attention-seeking, my dishonesty, not only cash register honest, where I'm stealing, but the dishonesty of using me to fix me. The same part of me, the part of me that creates the problem, is not where I go to solve the problem. And yet, on the journey of recovery, the part of me that created the problem, I go back to for the solution, and now I'm in a jam again. So anytime I'm using self-reliance to fix something, I'm practicing dishonesty, because in step 3 it says, God, you take my life, you guide me, you direct me, whatever you want me to do, and now I'm running the show again. I needed to remember, always need to remember, that when I ask God for help, the help that's coming down the pike might not be the help I was planning on. I remember being out of work. I think I shared this with you guys. I was out of work, and I had basically no money. And, just enough to cover expenses. And I'm sharing inventory with my sponsors. What do? Why don't you start giving some money away? That's not the answer I wanted. I held them to cut me a check and get me out of this. But somehow when we give back to the universe and take care of God's kids, God takes care of us. There were great lessons I learned in that. My attachments to money. That made me a man. Real men have lots of money. I had no money. I'm not a man. And I need to get money not only for money, but to work on my own manhood and be somebody. There was no God in that equation. Last I checked, the carpenter was homeless, had one pair of sandals and a robe. He didn't have a cell phone or a car. He didn't have any place to live. You'd think he did pretty good. It came to fear inventory, the evil and corroding thread. The fabric of my existence was shot through with it. Here's the interesting thing about fear. It's a 4-letter word. Every part of my life is moved by fear. If I took all my inventories and dropped them into a funnel, one word would come out: fear. Because behind every resentment is fear. When we look at the sex conduct, what's behind the sex conduct is fear again. They give us a fear inventory so we can be thorough, so we can identify the stuff going on, all generated in this wonderful predator called the mind. That's where fear lives, has free room and board, and it's constantly manufacturing more fear. Fear of no money, I come into a big chunk of change. Fear is not going anywhere, because now I have fear, who's going to take it from me? And so I list fears, a master list of fears after prayer. Then I write down, why do I have this fear? And I take a look at how I'm selfishly trying to control and manage my life, this fear, by doing certain things. Isolating, hoarding money, big shotism, character assassination, anger. What am I doing in the face of fear? And it comes down to the next column, which is the solution to all of this. I'm not trusting and relying upon God to care and protect me. Done. Anytime we're going through fear, I always take a look at, am I trusting or relying upon God to care and protect me? No. No wonder why I have fear. Because I'm trying to run the show my way. And if I'm trying to do that, I'm in self-reliance, and that gives birth to agnosticism, which means my life is unmanageable, which means I have more fear because I'm agnostic, and I'm in self-reliance, and it's just this vicious cycle, and there is no God. I'm me-centered, self-centered, rather than God-centered. How am I doing with fear in the past and present when things aren't going my way? When perhaps unemployment shows up, or breakup in a relationship, or poor health shows up, or loss of a loved one, whatever is going on. Watch the news. I mean, if you have a pulse, you have to get a little agitated. The fear of the end of the world. What's going on within me? I don't have God to care and protect me. And it came to sex inventory. Now, the first time I did a 5th step, and I was reading sex inventory, all my inventory was very clear to read. Nice big capital letters and neon lights. And my sex inventory was tiny little squibbly writing that no one could see. And my sponsor said to me, how much shame and embarrassment are you feeling about this? And I told him, he says, I want you to go home and write inventory about that, if there's a name for it that's been done. And I read the inventory by writing the questions. I listed relationships in my life, and I answered the 7 questions in the book. They're not the arbiter. They say we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. We all have our stuff. We all have our perceptions and conceptions on how this behavior should look, what we expect from our partner, whatever it might be, and it's always off. It's never godly. It's always selfish and self-seeking behavior. A lot of us have things that we're not proud of, things we've done, to take it to the grave stuff. That needs to go on paper. Here's my any lens. And I always have to remember, even currently when I'm writing inventory, no matter how uncomfortable I may become, it's divinely inspired because it's coming from God. That power which is greater than me is feeding me this information. It's not coming from me, let alone putting it on paper, because if it was up to me, it would not go on paper. But God's saying, it's okay, I gave it to you, go. You want to get free or don't you? How free? Here's the question, how free do we want to be? How drunk did I want to get? Very drunk. I like getting drunk. The more numb I was, the better. Well, how free do I want to be? Very free. And God will prune the tree to get us here, and then we'll go back and He'll get us more free. And there's no ending to this. This limitless load we've struck. It's called God. But I can't do that until I write inventory. The other thing inventory asked me to do is this sex goal and ideal. Sane, rational, healthy. A lot different than the way I was living. And I would, after prayer, write this written prayer out. Looking towards my future sex life. What would my conduct look like if it was God-inspired? Integrity, fidelity, honesty, humility. God-centered instead of me-centered. A sober gentleman, basically. With integrity and some dignity when it comes to treating women. And being grateful for friends who are in a happy relationship rather than cutting them down because I'm not in one. Things like that. That's godly stuff, which was vastly different than how I was always seeing the world. Now, some things began to happen to me when I was writing my first inventory, as it does now. Earlier I said we begin to look at this thing from an entirely different angle. I start to see the patterns of how I've been operating, and what's revealed to me are very old patterns that are still going on. And if those old patterns are still going on, I'm experiencing current unmanageability. So when I'm stuck in traffic, I can only see about 2 or 3 car lengths in front of me, maybe 2 or 3 car lengths behind me. I'm stuck in traffic, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of traffic. But the people who give us the traffic reports are usually up in a helicopter. They're looking down on the traffic from an entirely different angle. And they can see where the jam up is, where the accident is, and where you can get off. And they report back to us. So here I am stuck in traffic. I'm trying to see the road ahead. And what Step 4 allows me to do is lift me up and look down on my own life to see where I've been jammed up, to see the things that are blocking me from God. I cannot do that on my own, but I can certainly do it putting my hand in God's hand. Just want to share something. Okay. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. No resentment is acceptable. All resentments are unacceptable. If I'm sitting here tonight and I'm thinking of people I'm angry with, institutions I'm really angry with, that means I have a resentment. That is the poison in me that is going to get me drunk. How free do I want to be? I don't have the luxury of laying around in resentments. And I'm willing to lay odds from here to Vegas that if we took a poll, there's a handful of us who have a truckload of resentments. And going to meetings is not going to remove that. You can share about it for the next 90 days at 90 meetings, and it'll just give birth to more defects and more resentments. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. These are graphic words Bills is using about resentment. Terrible destructiveness. If I had a neighbor living next door to me and he was terribly destructive, I'd call the cops. But this thing lives within us and we give it an okay. We even give it a leg up. We've begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look upon them as sick people. These are the fourth-step promises. We have listed people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. What he just told us there is this. I'm writing inventory, and I'm writing about things I'm really angry with, people I'm really angry with, and Bill just told me here that those very things that I'm angry with and those people I'm really pissed off at, I'm about to go to them, hat in hand, and make amends for my behavior to them and disregard the damage they did to me. Talk about God's miracle. I'm in fourth step, and I'm writing, Joe, this son of a, and this one did this to me, and it goes on and on and on, and I'm writing and I'm really angry, and Bill tells me at the end of step 4, I haven't even done step 5 yet, that we're prepping to go back to those very same people and say, I need to make amends to you for what I did to you, even though you've been ripping me off for 20 years. When a book says common sense becomes uncommon sense, there it is. I'm selfish, self-seeking, self-deluded, all about me, alcoholic, and they're telling me as I'm writing that I'm going to go back to those very same people, and it is not going to be about me. It's about making reparations, mending, fixing it, to get right with the universe, to get right with you so I can get right with God. There's a book called Sermon on the Mount, and what he talks about in there is that if I haven't forgiven people who have hurt me, I have no business saying the Lord's Prayer. We want to talk about raising the bar. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. What I'm telling God is, God, you forgive me the very same way I forgive my neighbor who's harmed me. I'm in a lot of trouble. Did you ever think about that? That's what the Lord's Prayer is saying. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. God, you forgive me with the same passion that I forgave my neighbor, who I still throw under a bus every time I see him. And if I can't get past that, he writes about this. Don't even bother saying the Lord's Prayer, because I'm a fraud. I'm a hypocrite. I want God to grant me freedom and grace and liberty and all these things, but not for you. I'm not willing to do that to you. And what we quickly find out, something happens in the spirit of forgiveness that not only we let them off the hook, but we get free of the things that were bogging us down forever. I remember writing inventory, and there were things with my dad. Growing up, we just didn't get along. He was cut from a completely different cloth. And when my using took over, we did not get along. I hated him. And he made lots of mistakes with me. He did his best, but he made a lot of mistakes, and in his anger did and said some ugly things to me, which only fed the resentment and the hate I had towards him. But it wasn't until I wrote inventory and did a 4th column and then eventually shared it in step 5 that I realized what he was up against. He had no schooling. He had no therapy background. He had no church to go to. He refused to do that. He wasn't a godly man, so he took it into his own hands. And if I had a son like me, I would have probably strangled him a few times. He was a guy who grew up basically in the streets at poverty level, marries a woman who's an alcoholic and addict. His wife is trying to commit suicide every time he turns his back. She finally commits suicide. He's left at around 32 years old with 3 young boys to raise and a job to go to. And his friends are not like, cry on my shoulder, we'll talk about it. They weren't those type of guys. What do? Now your oldest son, the expectations are high in my family, the first male born, turns out to be just like mom, a drunk and a dope fiend, and we're going to do it all over again. No wonder why he was a little short-tempered. He had no way to turn. I could not see that until I wrote inventory, and I was met with an overwhelming spirit of forgiveness on how blind I had been. How could I possibly hate? How could I possibly be resentful? Because if I was in his shoes, I would have probably folded my cards. There is no way. And he's not a godly guy. But the more I looked at my old man's life and his walk, lots of mistakes, very edgy. There was more God operating in him to hold the family together than people in AA 30 years who were picking up new girls with 10 days sober. It's the walk. And so inventory allowed me to look at my life from a completely different angle and met with a spirit of forgiveness. We still disagree on a lot of things. My dad's really old school, from the year 200 AD, I think. Really old ideas. But I learned about loyalty. I learned about fidelity. I learned about integrity. I learned about humility by just watching his walk. I learned about caring for family by watching his walk. Those are lessons they don't teach me in college. Those are lessons I was able to position myself because of AA in life and learn from. So why wouldn't I do an inventory? Why wouldn't I take time to write out 4-column inventory, get a sponsor and write out 4-column inventory, and finally get free of the bondage which has me back to a drink and back to a drug? Because step one tells a guy like me the time and place is going to come, regardless of my intentions or the consequences in front of me. I am going to drink and drug. Period. That's non-negotiable. Step one has 43 pages. They Pete Marinelli, the time and place is going to come. You're an alkie. You're going to drink, and you can't get past that. You're going to use. Unless I experience this power greater than myself. And wishing it and wanting it is nice, but I need to experience it. And the only way I can experience God is by being free of me and flushing out all the things that are blocking me from God. And I will not put anything ahead of this. I'm a church member in good standing in my church. But my AA must come first because I'm an alcoholic. I do that stuff along with, not instead of, because I've seen a lot of people crash and burn that way. I'm an alcoholic. I need to be in a 12-step fellowship. And so that's what I do, and that's where God put me. If He wanted me somewhere else, He put me somewhere else. So little by slowly, I chop wood and carry water, and I found out that God carries His water in broken pots. And I'm so blessed because of that. That's all I got. Peace.